Good morning. Well, what do you know? According to the first post-primary polling in the U.S. Senate race, we have ourselves a real race brewing between Congressman Ed Markey of Malden, the Democratic nominee, and our guest this morning, private equity investor and former Navy SEAL Gabriel Gomez of Cohasset, easy winner of last Tuesday's Republican primary. Mr. Gomez, welcome.
Thank you, John.
Congratulations.
Appreciate it very much.
Did it feel easy or it looked easy?
No. It was a hard primary. We had three very good candidates.
Yeah.
And we were happy to win.
Why'd you win?
I think our message resonated, and we went out there and worked really hard, met a lot of people, and we got our message through, and I think people were very receptive to that message, and that's why we feel good going into the general election.
Well, the first polling, as I mentioned, shows you're in a close race with Congressman Markey. But it also shows what all polling has been showing for some time now, that the number one issue by far for voters is jobs and economic growth. What specifically will you do in the Senate to help generate economic growth in this state?
Sure. I mean, it is the number one issue. Everywhere we go, people talk about the economy, and getting jobs back to Massachusetts. And I think what we need to go down in D.C. is we need to start having policies that are business friendly. Right now, we've had a lot of policies come up from D.C., which I think are well-intentioned, but they're not business-friendly. They have too many regulations, and there's too much, mud they have to go through in order to get jobs back up here. For instance, on Obamacare, I think that it was a good thing to do, but it should have been done at a state level, and there's too much regulation going on. On Dodd-Frank, too much regulation once again. A lot of small businesses come to us and say, we shouldn't have to go to a bank and go through more compliance officers than loan officers. We need to have more practical business policies that are business-friendly.
Well, of course, Dodd-Frank was a regulatory response to the economic collapse, which in part was engendered by irresponsible behavior by the private sector. How much regulation is the right balance? I mean, what's your alternative to Dodd-Frank?
Well, no, I think the thesis of Dodd-Frank is right, but I think they just went overboard. And I think this is what happens when you have people down in D.C. They don't have the real-world practical experience that have actually been in the private sector. For instance, myself helping companies grow and be successful. And I think what you have down in D.C. is you've got these career politicians that are well-intentioned, but they don't know the practical, realities of what happens when you pass some of these regulations and they impact businesses the wrong way.
Well, let's talk about a particular sector, a very important sector of the Massachusetts economy, high tech. It was reported last week that tech stocks have dropped to their lowest levels in the past 7 years, and they're seen as vulnerable to more losses in the near term. Give us an idea of something you might do in the Senate to help spur growth in that sector.
I think in technology, for instance, right now, we educate a lot of people here in Massachusetts specifically that are foreign nationals. And then what happens is they end up leaving afterwards. And that's part of the immigration reform that we're talking about that's going through the Senate. We need to be able to keep a lot of these highly educated, highly trained people here so they can work in the companies here and they don't go overseas to compete against our companies here.
So how do you do that?
Well, I think it's going to be part of the immigration reform where we have more of these visas, so we let people come here and stay here after they get educated and work here for a period of time instead of sending them home right away so they can compete against the United States. And I see you see part of the effect right there.
All right, let's take a short break, and when we continue, we'll talk more about the economy, economic growth, and what Mr. Gomez wants to do about it in the U.S. Senate when we continue. Stay with us.